Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're basically embarking on an economic detective story. We're going to be looking at a massive, yet surprisingly complex, economic boom that happened in one of the world's most dynamic countries, Nigeria. Our investigation today is based on a fascinating analysis titled Two Sides of a Coin: FDI and Nigeria's Service-Led Structural Transformation. We're going to unpack the data, follow the money, and really try to understand the mechanics behind this sudden rise to economic dominance. And maybe more importantly, we'll look at the crucial policies needed to fix its hidden flaws. Right, so to really understand this story, we've got to rewind to a pivotal year, 2014. That was the year an economic maneuver known as a GDP rebasing took place. Now, essentially, this just means updating the base year used to calculate the size of the economy so it reflects newer industries and, well, more accurate data. But the result? Almost overnight, this statistical update officially crowned Nigeria as Africa's largest economy. It was a massive headline, completely trumping South Africa, who had been the longtime contender for that top spot. But, as we'll see, that impressive top-line number didn't exactly tell the whole story of what was happening on the ground. So here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the 2014 GDP surprise. Next, the uninclusive growth problem. Then, we'll follow the FDI trail, check out the service sector boom, and finally, wrap up with creating inclusive economic growth. Let's start with Section 1, the 2014 GDP surprise. Let's focus on the sheer scale of the macroeconomic shift that suddenly became visible to the world back in 2014. Because, a sudden jump in GDP isn't just a bigger number on a spreadsheet. Significant growth implies deep, foundational changes in how a country actually operates. It means there are massive shifts happening under the surface regarding which sectors are contributing to domestic output and, crucially, how and where a nation is employing its people. For a developing country like Nigeria experiencing this kind of surge, you'd expect it to be driven by things like international trade, foreign direct investment, and major shifts in industrial policy. Which brings us to Section 2, the uninclusive growth problem. Here is where our economic detective story hits its major twist. This right here is the core mystery we need to solve. Why wasn't the growth inclusive? Seriously, think about it. How can an economy become the biggest in Africa, boasting these incredible output numbers, while simultaneously leaving so many of its people behind? Because when growth doesn't translate into widespread prosperity, it forces us to step back and ask, what exactly is driving that growth, and who is actually benefiting from it? That leads us to Section 3, following the FDI trail. To solve this mystery, researcher Oluyemi Ola-David and her co-author Oyebanke identified a critical driver of structural transformation to focus her investigation on, and that was foreign direct investment, or FDI. Just so we're all on the exact same page here, FDI is simply investment flowing from one country into another. In a developing nation, FDI has historically expected to be the main engine that drives those big shifts in the distribution of production and final output. She knew that if she could track the FDI, she could understand the true nature of Nigeria's transformation. To do this, she didn't just look at a few recent years. No. She and her research partner dug deep into historical data on the Nigerian economy, tracking structural changes over an impressive 3 decades. She wanted to see exactly which sectors were driving the change over the long term, what kind of domestic policies were at play, and, most importantly, who was receiving the lion's share of this foreign investment. And honestly, her findings were incredibly revealing. Historically, the industrial sector received the greatest percentage of FDI, but in the most recent decades she analyzed, that industrial share has actually been declining. Meanwhile, the FDI pouring into the service sector has been rapidly increasing. And notably, foreign direct investment flowing into the agricultural sector, it's been entirely minuscule by comparison. This really brilliantly illustrates the human impact of those financial flows. When she mapped out the employment trends over that same period, she found that the percentage of people employed in the industrial and agricultural sectors had been dropping in recent years. So where were all the jobs going? The service sector. The service sector was the one actively absorbing workers and employing more people. Moving right along to Section 4, the service sector boom. Based on her exhaustive research, a very clear winner emerged in the story of Nigeria's structural transformation. The crucial point here is the stark contrast between these sectors. On one hand, you have traditional staples like agriculture and industry seeing declining FDI and a shrinking percentage of national employment. On the other hand, services experienced an absolute boom. They saw increasing foreign investment, they hired way more people, and incredibly, labor productivity growth in the service sector actually increased. In fact, her research showed that between 2005 and 2009, labor productivity growth attributable to structural change in services surpassed the growth due to within sector changes. So she concluded definitively that FDI in Nigeria has absolutely been contributing to a service sector-led structural transformation. And finally, Section 5, creating inclusive economic growth. Okay, so if we know services are booming, but the growth is largely uninclusive, what does she propose to make this economic reality benefit everyone? Well, she outlines several vital policy implications to generate true inclusive structural transformation. First up, she recommends launching a strategic infrastructure development program. This is absolutely essential to create an environment that can stimulate large-scale domestic and foreign investments in agriculture and manufacturing. But to ensure that growth doesn't just stay locked at the top, her second and third steps advocate for direct policy support to protect and promote smallholder agriculture, right alongside support for small-scale industry engagements. This is how you ensure the everyday workers aren't left behind by these massive multinational shifts. Now, while FDI and policy are obviously crucial, we also have to ask what other factors drove this transformation on the ground. The source material features a really fascinating community discussion that expands our view of the Nigerian economic landscape. Commenters highlighted several alternative yet deeply interconnected factors. They pointed to the emergence of BRICS economies, the overarching advent of globalization inducing all these cross-border transactions, and rapid IT and technological improvements. But, they also pointed to something deeply cultural, the sheer resilience of Nigerians who became highly innovative out of necessity, creating their own income streams from the ground up when traditional jobs were just scarce. To give you a ground-level perspective on this, one commenter noted, the emergence of the BRICS economy, especially China and India, who shifted foreign investment to Nigeria to take advantage of underutilized materials and cheap labor. Now, we're sharing this impartially, simply because it highlights how global superpowers recognized and capitalized on Nigeria's potential, which really adds another layer of complexity to the FDI narrative we've been tracking. Which leaves us with a critical, overarching question to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. Does foreign investment ultimately help or hinder equitable wealth distribution in developing economies? Because the Nigerian 2014 boom shows us pretty clearly that a rising tide doesn't automatically lift all boats, unless intentional policies are built to ensure it does. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the data, and as always, keep questioning the numbers behind the headlines.